In the shadowed corridors of power, where ancient rivalries meet modern weapons, two men exchanged words that would shake the world. On one side, President Donald Trump, bold, unyielding, and determined to reshape America's role in the Middle East. On the other, Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, defiant, ideological, and convinced that resistance was the only path to survival. What began as sharp rhetorical exchanges quickly crossed into something far more dangerous. Threats became targets, warnings became strikes, and the world watched as the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow artery carrying 1/5 of global oil, teetered on the edge of closure. This is not just another chapter in the long US-Iran standoff. This is how explosive statements from two determined leaders pushed the region toward open conflict, sent oil prices surging, and forced every major power on Earth to recalculate its strategy. Let's break this down and see how we got here, and what it truly means for the global order. To understand how we reached this dangerous precipice, we must first examine the deep structural tensions that have defined US-Iran relations for decades. Since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, the two nations have operated as strategic adversaries. Iran built a network of regional influence through proxies and advanced its nuclear program, while the United States sought to contain Tehran's ambitions through sanctions, military presence, and alliances with Gulf states and Israel. President Trump's return to the White House in 2025 brought a renewed maximum pressure approach. Trump had long viewed Iran as a primary source of regional instability and had previously withdrawn from the 2015 nuclear deal. His administration made clear that unchecked Iranian enrichment, ballistic missile development, and support for non-state actors would not be tolerated. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader for over 3 decades, responded with characteristic ideological firmness. For Khamenei, any concession on enrichment or regional influence represented an existential threat to the Islamic Republic itself. He repeatedly framed American demands as attempts at regime change disguised as diplomacy. By early 2026, the rhetoric had intensified dramatically. Trump publicly called for new leadership in Tehran and warned of overwhelming consequences if Iran disrupted vital shipping lanes. Khamenei, in turn, dismissed these threats, insisting that the Islamic Republic would never surrender its core rights and that America would ultimately fail, just as it had for 47 years. These statements were not idle talk. They reflected fundamentally incompatible visions. One side determined to reset the regional balance through strength, the other equally committed to resisting what it saw as foreign domination. The stage was set. All that remained was a spark. The verbal duel rapidly escalated into direct confrontation. Throughout late 2025 and early 2026, Trump issued increasingly pointed warnings. He stated that the United States knew the location of Iranian leadership and urged unconditional surrender, while making clear that any attempt to close the Strait of Hormuz would trigger American retaliation 20 times harder than previous actions. Trump also openly discussed the need for new leadership in Iran and positioned himself as a player in that transition. Khamenei responded with equal force. In public addresses and statements, he rejected any negotiations that demanded zero enrichment, accused the U.S. of seeking the Islamic Republic's destruction, and warned that American military involvement would bring irreparable damage. He reminded his audience that tyrants and arrogant powers eventually fall, drawing implicit parallels to Trump's own position. Matters came to a head in late February 2026. Joint U.S.-Israeli strikes targeted key Iranian facilities, including sites linked to leadership compounds. President Trump announced that Ayatollah Ali Khamenei had been killed in the operation, describing it as justice for past actions and a historic opportunity for the Iranian people to seize control of their destiny. Trump called Khamenei one of the most evil people in history and urged Iranian forces to lay down their arms. Iran retaliated by mining the Strait of Hormuz, effectively closing the critical choke point and triggering a sharp rise in global oil prices. The United States responded with a naval blockade of Iranian ports. A new Iranian leadership structure emerged, but the cycle of threats continued, with warnings of further strikes if oil flows remained disrupted or if Iran refused a comprehensive deal. These developments transformed a war of words into a shooting war with immediate global consequences. Beneath the dramatic statements lies a more calculated strategic game. Trump's rhetoric served multiple purposes. It signaled resolve to Iran, reassured regional allies, and applied psychological pressure on the Iranian system. By openly discussing leadership change and targeting high-value figures, the US aimed to fracture the regime's cohesion and expose its vulnerabilities. The speed and precision of the strikes also demonstrated advanced intelligence capabilities and close coordination with Israel. For Khamenei and the Iranian leadership, defiance was not mere posturing. In a system where ideological purity underpins legitimacy, compromise on nuclear enrichment or missile capabilities could trigger internal collapse. Khamenei's statements reinforced the narrative of resistance against imperialism, rallying hardliners and framing any setback as temporary. Yet the hidden reality was Iran's increasing isolation and the enormous economic strain of sustained confrontation. One critical hidden fact is the succession dynamic. The reported death of Ali Khamenei and the emergence of new leadership tested the Islamic Republic's continuity mechanisms. Trump's public opposition to certain successors and comments about being involved in leadership choices were highly provocative, revealing an American willingness to interfere directly in Iran's internal power structure, something previous administrations had avoided stating so bluntly. Another layer involves timing and miscalculation. Both sides appear to have underestimated the other's red lines. Iran likely believed its asymmetric tools and Hormuz leverage would deter full-scale American involvement. The US, conversely, calculated that decisive action could break Iranian resistance faster than many analysts predicted. The result has been a dangerous feedback loop, where each new statement raises the stakes further. Pay close attention here. This confrontation is not simply bilateral. It tests the credibility of American power projection, the resilience of Iran's theocratic system, and the willingness of other powers to intervene or exploit the chaos. The consequences of this confrontation extend far beyond the Persian Gulf. The temporary closure of the Strait of Hormuz sent oil prices surging above $100 per barrel, disrupting global energy markets and threatening economic stability in Europe and Asia. Even partial disruptions in this narrow waterway, through which roughly 20% of the world's oil passes, create immediate ripple effects on inflation, supply chains, and investor confidence worldwide. For America's allies, the crisis has forced difficult choices. Gulf states worry about shipping security and energy export revenues, while European nations face higher energy costs amid their own economic pressures. The conflict has also strained relations within NATO and tested the durability of U.S. security guarantees. On the other side of the equation, the U.S.-Iran clash strengthens ties between Iran, Russia, and China. Beijing and Moscow see strategic value in a distracted United States and a weakened Western energy position. This dynamic risks accelerating the formation of a more cohesive Eurasian bloc, with implications for everything from Taiwan to Ukraine. Perhaps most concerning is the nuclear dimension. The death of the previous supreme leader and the intense military pressure may have removed internal restraints on Iran's nuclear program. What was once a carefully managed threshold strategy now carries higher risks of rapid advancement, potentially triggering a regional arms race. The humanitarian and strategic costs are mounting as well. Civilian casualties, displaced populations, and the long-term damage to Iran's infrastructure all complicate any future stabilization effort. This conflict has reminded the world just how fragile global energy security remains and how quickly great power competition can turn hot in vital choke points. As of early May 2026, the situation remains fluid and highly volatile. Iran has proposed arrangements to reopen the Strait of Hormuz while postponing deeper nuclear negotiations. The Trump administration has reviewed these ideas but expressed dissatisfaction, insisting on more concrete commitments regarding Iran's nuclear program before easing the naval blockade. Several scenarios are now possible. A negotiated pause could emerge if both sides find a face-saving formula, perhaps limited Iranian concessions on enrichment, paired with American steps to restore oil flows. However, hardliners on both sides may push for continued pressure. New Iranian leadership faces the dual challenge of projecting strength domestically while managing an economy under severe strain. Key variables will shape the coming weeks. Whether Iran attempts further asymmetric responses, how effectively the U.S. maintains its blockade without triggering a wider energy crisis, and whether third-party mediators, possibly from Gulf states or China, can facilitate back-channel talks. Trump has signaled a desire to conclude the military phase relatively quickly, but he has also made clear that any final deal must address core American concerns. The risk of miscalculation remains elevated. Another round of strikes or a serious incident in the Gulf could rapidly expand the conflict. At the same time, mutual exhaustion and economic pain may create an opening for de-escalation. What is certain is that the coming months will determine whether this confrontation becomes a turning point toward a new regional order, or merely the latest chapter in a long, dangerous rivalry. The clash between Trump and Khamenei began with explosive words, but quickly revealed the raw power of geopolitical reality. Personal resolve, ideological conviction, and strategic necessity collided in one of the most dangerous flashpoints on Earth. What we witnessed was not simply a bilateral dispute. It was a stress test for the post-Cold War order, exposing vulnerabilities in global energy security and the limits of deterrence in an era of great power competition. The killing of a sitting supreme leader, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, and the resulting economic shockwaves have changed the Middle East in ways that will reverberate for years. This episode reminds us that in international affairs, rhetoric is never just rhetoric. When backed by credible military power and existential stakes, words can ignite fires that prove difficult to extinguish. The hidden implication here is profound. No nation, however powerful, can ignore the interconnected nature of energy routes, nuclear thresholds, and regional alliances. The coming chapters will test whether diplomacy can catch up to destruction, or whether this confrontation marks the beginning of a more fragmented and dangerous world. In the end, the story of Trump versus Khamenei is a cautionary tale about leadership, miscalculation, and the high cost of unresolved rivalries. The world will be watching closely to see what lessons are learned before the next crisis erupts. Thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments which aspect of this unfolding situation you want to explore next.